All right, Leviticus 21, let's call this one fishbowl. And of course, it doesn't necessarily come from the text, but it is a passage that reminded me as we're shifting to talk about the holiness of the priest. It's not just going to talk about the holiness of the priest, it's going to talk about his family as well. And it reminded me that those who live in a fishbowl, modern times, especially ministers, can have a special pressure not only on themselves, but on their kids, first and foremost, the minister. In this section, one of the things that caught me off guard is the priests in general can't be defiled by dead bodies, but there are exceptions for close family members. However, the chief priest had this limitation in verse 10 of Leviticus 21. The priest who is chief among his brothers, on whose head the anointing oil is poured, and who has been consecrated to wear the garments, shall not let the hair of his head hang loose, nor tear his clothes. He shall not go into any dead bodies, nor make himself unclean, even for his father or his mother. He shall not go out of the sanctuary, lest he profane the sanctuary of his God, for the consecration of the anointing oil of his God is on him. I am the Lord. And so understand how the chief priest had an additional burden of in times of bereavement. He wouldn't even be able to go around his own mother and father if he were on duty. And that might not necessarily be the same type of burden ministers see now, but there are certain times when, much like a person is deployed overseas, an individual's in a situation where they simply can't break away in times when they otherwise would. I remember times past when I had made commitments and I simply couldn't be there for a friend who was in need. And I know there are others who have an even greater stress because they're torn between two places and two commitments. At times when they'd like to look after family or loved ones and they simply can't. But going on, we said the additional pressure is on the family as well. And this is one that took me back a little bit because when I first heard of passages like this, they hit close to home, as I said in videos past, because I've had my own experiences with eczema and scaling diseases, those kinds of things. Verse 16 will say, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to Aaron, saying, none of your offspring throughout their generations who has a blemish may approach to offer the bread of his God. For no one who has a blemish shall draw near, a man blind or lame, or one who has a mutilated face, or a limb too long, or a man who has an injured foot or an injured hand, or a hunchback or a dwarf, or a man with a defect in his sight, or an itching disease, or scabs, or crushed testicles. No man of the offspring of Aaron the priest who has a blemish shall come near to offer the Lord's food offering, since he has a blemish. He shall not come near to offer the bread of his God. He may eat the bread of his God, both of the most holy and of the holy things, but he shall not go through the veil or approach the altar, because he has a blemish. Oh, goodness. And I wrestled with that for a long time, even though I knew we were not under the law. I was not a Torah observant Hebrew. Just hearing things like that when you're trying to draw close to God, in your mind, you're like, okay, well, what is wrong with me that would keep me from being able to serve in that capacity if I were under that law? And eventually I was able to receive the counsel of an elder in the church, older gentleman, an elder in the church, who just encouraged me. He didn't necessarily have an answer, but sometimes just a person's concern can help encourage you. And over time, a passage that I read not too long ago from Luke has been my encouragement, and one that I hope is an encouragement to anybody who feels that for whatever reason they are not worthy to approach God. When Jesus in the Sermon on the Plain, as I said not too long ago in verse 22 of Luke chapter 6, said this, blessed are you when people hate you and when they exclude you and when they revile you and spurn your name as evil on the account of the Son of Man. Rejoice in that day and leap for joy, for behold, your reward is great in heaven. For so their fathers did to the prophets. That's become a go-to passage because it's easy to feel excluded in this line of work, especially when you have kids who are in a fishbowl. Sometimes we as older people, we know what it's like to be ostracized, but the young people, they don't get it because they're going through it for the first time. So remember what it was like when you were first trying to deal with being left out and excluded and not knowing why. Understand how God, Jesus, is offering this encouragement that your reward is great in heaven insofar as you are enduring the fishbowl that sometimes will heap additional stress on you that other folks can suffer with in private. And so understand this, to the degree you're suffering for God, an additional burden, he's promised you that you have an additional blessing, in addition to the strength that you're developing by going through difficulties most may not be able to understand.